The fierce clashes of the war between Ukraine and Russia still continue on the front lines of Zaporizhia and Donetsk. At the moment, an attack corridor is being created by the Ukrainian army from Zaporizhia to Donetsk. First of all, the Ukrainians wanted to take full control of Zaporizhia. Then the big offensive plans of Kiev seemed to move towards the Donetsk region because the acquisition of an important front line like Bakhmut is of critical value for Ukraine. On the other hand, Ukrainians wanted to advance their offensive plans in Zaporizhia towards Crimea as well as Donetsk. In other words, the situation of clashes in the Zaporizhia region will be vital for Kiev's next move. For this purpose, the Ukrainians have already begun to use Western combat vehicles because Kiev now wants to reach its main goals in this critical time period where the breaking moments of the war are experienced. A lot has changed in Zaporizhia, with the inclusion of Western battle tanks in the game. Currently, the front lines of Zaporizhia are on fire with the attacks of war vehicles supplied to the Ukrainians from Western Europe and the USA. Come on, let's discover together what happened in Zaporizhia and what kind of innovations the Ukrainian troops made here with Western war vehicles. First of all, the Russians had to withdraw from Neskikny, Storazev, and Blahodatan after the first wave of attacks by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian fighters gained the upper hand in Zaporizhia and are advancing step by step towards their main goal. To this end, the Ukrainians launched a mechanized attack on Velika Novosilka, where a large number of armored combat vehicles attracted the attention of the Russians, suppressed the fire of the Russian forces, and provided protection for the infantry. To the west of the river in the south of the region, the Ukrainians first launched a massive artillery bombardment. As a result, Russia's first line of defense in this area collapsed, and infantry units of the Ukrainian army quickly closed the distance and began to attack everything that was left of the Russian defensive line. The aim of the Ukrainians was to repeat this offensive tactic without interruption. With each iteration, the Russian defenses continued to crumble faster as the opposing positions had no chance to be properly deployed and supported. The 35th and 137th Mechanized Brigades of Ukraine announced that their latest attack today is heavier than the previous day. This was because Ukrainian forces used hundreds of Western battle tanks and battleships on the front line between Zaporizhia and Donetsk, including Velika Novosilka. In other words, the $8.5 million German Leopard 2s, the $6.5 million British Challenger 2s, and the $3 million American Bradley II light tanks from the west led the Ukrainian offensive. Powerful Western tanks at the forefront of the Ukrainian army broke through the Russian positions in Zaporizhia and all the Russian lines of level 2 defense. After the attack by the Western tanks of the Ukrainian army, the Russian troops were pushed to the deepest front lines in the south of Velika Novosilka region as a result of the second wave of Ukraine's big attack. The Russian 1st Corps stationed in the region had to withdraw completely, while the German Leopard 2 battle tanks used by the Ukrainian army continued to hit critical front lines such as Neskikny, Storazev, and Blahodatan in the southern lines of Velika Novosilka. Ukrainian infantry units continued to advance in these areas. Ukrainian tank battalions managed to push the Russian forces as far as Staromestska. The Ukrainian Army's Leopard 2 battle tanks and M1 Bradley battleships and Challengers, which formed a safe land corridor here, allowed the Ukrainian infantry units to spread over much larger areas. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and the frontline commanders of the Ukrainian forces in Velika Novosilka reported that Russian troops are not ready for such a major offensive in this region. What the Ukrainian authorities shared was true because from the moment the Ukrainian tank battalion and infantry troops entered Makarivka, the Russian forces left the front lines in these areas and started to flee. The escape areas of the Russian troops stretched south of Velika Novosilka to escape the Ukrainian offensive. Putin's troops first advanced to the settlement of Neskikny and then to Storazev. As the attacks of Ukraine's Western tank and battleship brigades continued to intensify, Russian troops advanced further south over Storazev towards Blahodatan. Then the Russian forces, whose defensive fortifications collapsed in this city, finally came to Staromainsky via Makarivka. However, it was reported that the Ukrainian forces still continued to narrow the Russian troops here with Western war vehicles, and they dispersed the Russian fortifications and trenches with tank shots. Therefore, it is obvious that the Russian forces will not be able to hold out for a long time in the Staromestska settlement. And they will try to escape from there because the Ukrainian armed forces do not hesitate to increase the severity of the attacks, even though these offensive operations are progressing successfully. So the Ukrainians are now achieving clear victories. As a result, Zelensky's army is dispersing whatever the Russian army comes up against, both in Zaporizhia and in the steppes of this region close to Donetsk. So why did these Ukrainian counterattacks take effect so quickly? And how did the Russians disperse so easily on the southern fronts of Velika Novosilka? Of course, as we mentioned in the video, the offensive operation launched by the Ukrainian forces in this region was coordinated with Western combat vehicles and supported by many reinforcements. But the military training of the Ukrainian soldiers so far and all the data on how Western battle tanks and battleships should be used are key factors in the clockwork of Kiev's current offensive plans. The Russians did not care much for Ukrainian soldiers to receive Western combat vehicle training from their allies, such as the UK, USA, Germany, and Poland. The Moscow administration was against this supported Western education, but the Kremlin thought that such military training could not save Ukraine. But now, when we look at the battlefield, we can clearly see that the Russian authorities were wrong. Even Putin's best tanks had difficulty competing with these powerful Western tanks. Putin stated that they do not have the technology to deal with these tanks. This statement was perhaps one of the most revealing examples of the helplessness of the Russians since the beginning of the war. However, the importance of these state-of-the-art Western tanks, which came as aid for the Ukrainian army, became even more evident. The latest events in Zaporizhia are the most concrete proof of this. The first day that Ukraine started to use Western tanks on the front lines made a lot of noise. It seems that Ukraine will now use these tanks frequently on the front lines with the support of the West and the USA to Kiev. The Ukrainian forces are expected to spread these advantages to much wider areas on the battlefield because the USA announced a new military aid package to Kiev. It announced a new security aid package that underlines the unwavering U.S. support for Ukraine. This package, which includes critical air defense and munitions capabilities and has a total value of $2.1 billion, is provided under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. This USA package demonstrates the continued commitment to both Ukraine's short-term critical capabilities and the enduring capacity of the Ukrainian armed forces to defend its territory and deter Russian aggression in the long term. The latest aid package of the USA includes financial support for additional ammunition for Patriot air defense systems, Hawk air defense systems and missiles, 105mm and 203mm artillery shells, Puma unmanned air systems, and laser-guided rocket system ammunition. In summary, it seems that the freedom corridor that the Ukrainian army wants to create in the Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Crimea directions will be built very soon. For this, of course, the support of Kiev allies such as the USA is very important because we saw the most obvious example of this in Zaporizhia. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, is doing its part, making this goal of Kiev easier. If things continue in this way, as we mentioned, there is no reason why Ukrainians should not regain their freedom. The war in Ukraine raised many paradoxes. One of the weirdest was that Vladimir Putin's invasion suddenly made autocratic politicians in neighboring countries look like the good guys. Nowhere was this more so than in Poland. As the war shifted, the global geopolitical focus to Eastern and Central Europe, Warsaw came to the fore. The country, previously reluctant to accept refugees, has welcomed millions of Ukrainian women and children with open arms in an impressive display of solidarity. When Poland began to play an important role in the defense of Ukraine, it provided Kiev with major assistance, including €2 billion worth of military equipment. Poland is an important regional power on the border with Ukraine. Poland was also among the countries most affected by the Russia-Ukraine war as it neighbors Ukraine. That's why the Warsaw government is trying to protect its borders. There is a historical sense of insecurity in relations between Poland and Russia. The Ukrainian war further reinforced Poland's sense of insecurity. As a matter of fact, the developments may drag Poland into a wide conflict that may have devastating consequences. In fact, according to some experts, Russia's next target may be Poland. Poland began to take some measures to not be the next target and to challenge Vladimir Putin. So how drastic are the measures that Poland is taking against Russia? And what is Poland's goal? Poland and the United States have had a bumpy relationship over the years, but the war in Ukraine brought them closer and made Poland an indispensable ally. Cooperation between the two countries has been increasing in recent years. The United States is strengthening its military presence near the Russian borders. Polish officials have been demanding the U.S. to establish a permanent military base in their country. For many years, in the face of a possible Russian threat to meet the needs of the U.S. Army in Europe, improve command and control capabilities, and manage the forward operating areas within the Republic of Poland. The Army established the U.S. Army Polish garrison in a ceremony on March 21st. The garrison is one of the lasting improvements in the DOD posture in Europe. Based on assessments from the 2021 Global Posture Review and consultations with NATO allies and its announcement by President Biden in June 2022, with the opening of the first permanent U.S. military garrison on Polish soil in March, the number of permanent U.S. military bases in Europe rose to 8. Camp Kosciuszko, the first permanent U.S. military garrison on Polish soil, started its operations with a ceremony in the city of Poznan. Military officials from both countries and Polish Minister of National Defense, Mariusz Błaszczak, attended the opening ceremony of the first permanent military unit at the garrison level. Błaszczak said that at a time when Russia was trying to rebuild its empire and attacked Ukraine, they valued the constant presence of the U.S. armies in the country. It will also transfer 19 air tankers of the United States National Guard and the U.S. Air Force Reserve in Poland in the coming months. The move aims to strengthen the U.S. Air Force's presence in Eastern Europe and ensure the security of allies within NATO. The measures taken by Poland are not limited to this extent. The Polish government says that within 2 years the country's armed forces will double, making it one of the most powerful military groups in Europe. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to increase the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000 due to Russian aggression. The defense minister wants Poland to build an army big enough to act as a dam that won't be demolished by Russia. With this move, Poland aims to deploy its army up to the Russian border. In addition, Poland stated that by increasing the number of soldiers, it will have an army 3 times the size of the United Kingdom. The UK Army has around 100,000 soldiers in active service. Faced with the general election in the autumn defense spending spree of billions of pounds that resulted in massive orders for tanks, artillery, and warplanes, Błaszczak stated that within 2 years the Polish army will be the strongest in Europe. On the other hand, Poland continues to provide military support to Ukraine while strengthening its borders. Poland has pledged to send 4 MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, the first NATO member to do so as a key move in Kiev's battle to counter Russian aggression. President Andrzej Duda stated that about a dozen aircraft inherited from the former German Democratic Republic will be delivered in the coming days after their maintenance. Warsaw is the leader among NATO allies in the supply of heavy weapons to Kiev. The announcement that Poland will send Soviet signed aircraft marks one step ahead of the alliance's remaining commitments and could pressure other member states to do the same. Other NATO countries were reluctant to go beyond this decision and send tanks to Kiev. Earlier this year, the U.S. stressed that Poland's move would not force Washington's hand. On the other hand, Poland was one of the most vocal European countries against Russia even before the invasion of Ukraine. Russia is still seen by many in Polish political and diplomatic circles in the context of the Cold War. Putin has always been seen as unreliable by Warsaw, and Russia's expansion is something that must be fought at all costs. It is one of the few NATO countries required by law to meet its 2% of GDP defense spending commitment and is an active member of the European defense community. Sending MiGs is not an unexpected move for Poland and is fully compatible with NATO membership. It could change the dynamic within the alliance, act as a catalyst for more countries to do so, or upset countries like Hungary that oppose greater NATO involvement in the conflict. The big question will be whether they are putting pressure on the UK and the US, which they will do for Germany. Ultimately, it's probably Poland's intention to put this pressure on other allies. The measures taken and the critical steps taken by Poland reveal its justification against the Russian threat. Because Russia's aggressive actions are not limited to Ukraine. Even if Russia attacks only Ukrainian territory by land, it frequently carries out harassing flights over NATO airspace with warplanes. NATO planes are harshly responding to these Russian flights. RAF Typhoons attacked a Russian spy plane twice in just 1 day near NATO airspace. RAF Typhoons were mixed to intercept several Russian aircraft flying close to NATO airspace. British warplanes managed to intercept a Russian Air Force spy plane escorted by an elite Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jet. Swedish Air Force Gripens joined the RAF Typhoons during the tense encounter. The Russian fighter aircraft did not comply with the international norms as it did not communicate about its movement with irrelevant flight information zones. The first intercept took place close to Swedish airspace. The second occurred when Russian jets flew towards the Kaliningrad Oblast. The Russian Ilyushin Il-20 intelligence collection aircraft was among the aircraft detected in the exchange. Ilyushin drones are capable of analyzing military communications and signals to assist attacking aircraft or ground forces. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace praised the British pilots involved in the intervention. Ben Wallace said the interceptions are a stark reminder that the RAF is always ready to defend the skies of the UK and its allies. As it is known, RAF Typhoons took off from Amari Air Base in Estonia, where they are currently based as part of NATO's air policing mission. The RAF will hand over the task to the Spanish Air Force in August. In addition, NATO is currently conducting a series of naval exercises in the Baltic Sea. Russian spy planes regularly monitor Allied ships during these exercises. RAF Wing Commander McCall said that this is a busy time, but these interceptions remain routine for us. McCall stressed their ability to mix and intercept multiple Russian jets in different situations in a short time is testament to their resilience and flexibility. It seems that Russia's aggression is not limited to the territory of Ukraine, but Russia's dangerous moves are being prosecuted by Ukraine on the front lines and blocked by NATO across the border. Faced with obstacles from all sides, we'll wait and see the moves of Russia in the coming days. The distances between the fronts begin to shorten. The Ukrainians continue their successful advances in Bakhmut in the direction of Krasnohora, Soledad-Lysychansk. In other words, we see that the Ukrainians have formed a corridor of ground attack from the Donetsk region towards Luhansk. The biggest factor in the formation of this corridor was the capture of the Baryka region by the Ukrainian forces. Thanks to this, the Ukrainians provided themselves with a sight line of about 130 kilometers with its strategic location superiority. The Ukrainian armed forces began to carry out active offensive operations on the front lines of the Luhansk region, such as Kremenna and Stoletov. It turned out that the Russians carried out unsuccessful attacks in these two cities, and that the Ukrainians were much more active and dominant in Kremenna and Stutthof. Thanks to this, for Russia, this situation is very critical because the Russian army uses the cities close to the border lines in the Luhansk region for military supply lines. However, when the Ukrainians captured Baryka and advanced to the Luhansk fronts, the Russian military supply lines were blocked, and the Ukrainian armed forces continues to dominate an area of approximately 50 kilometers, increasing their effectiveness in Kremenna and Stardov. The Ukrainians want to expand their offensive access to the Troitsky region. Here, the aim of the Ukrainians is not only to control the Russian supply lines, it is also understood that the Ukrainian army wants to support the struggles of the Free Russian Legion groups on the Russian border lines by focusing on the north of Stadov. We know that the Free Russian Legion groups and the Russian volunteer units started a struggle reaching Belgorod from the direction of Kharkiv in the northwestern part of the Troitsky district. It is predictable that the Ukrainian forces in Stutthof would at least want to create a security area from Troitsky to Kharkiv. But the Russians do not want to lose control here to Ukraine. Although Russian forces strive for this, many front lines of the Luhansk region often include mobilized Russian citizens. How long amateur Russian assault groups can defend Luhansk is debatable. However, it seems that this situation will change as the Ukrainians break the Russian fortifications with their attacks on the areas extending to Stutthof. Every day, because a few days ago, the Ukrainian armed forces carried out an unexpected offensive operation near Stutthof. This attack was actually repelled by Russian forces. The reason for this was that the Russian army had military units such as the 1st Guards, Tank Army, the 4th Tank Division, and the 144th Motorized Division in this area. But this offensive operation by the Ukrainians near Stutthof looked a bit like a diversionary tactic because the Ukrainians did not prolong the offensive operation in this area too long. And they turned to a different front line of Luhansk in the same period with this attack. The front line was Severodonetsk, one of the critical areas of Luhansk. Some Ukrainian forces used the pontoon bridge to attack this area. The Russians realized this offensive action of the Ukrainian troops too late. President Putin's army had only the 208th Motorized Regiment and the 237th Tank Regiment in this area. But the offensive operations of the Ukrainians happened so quickly that the Russian troops did not have much time to stop it. While the Ukrainian armed forces continued their critical offensive operations in Luhansk, things started to get complicated. In the other offensive axis of this liberation operation that started with Markiivka, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, Hanna Maliar, said in a recent statement on this issue that Ukraine has advanced from 200 meters to 1,100 meters in some areas around the eastern ruined city of Bakhmut in the last 24 hours. Kiev hopes that the long-awaited counteroffensive will mark a pivotal moment in the war and wants to retake a significant part of the Russian-occupied territory. That this goal aimed by Kiev is progressing successfully for now is confirmed by the statements of Minister Maliar. Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Secretary Alexei Danilov reported that Ukrainian forces continue to advance on the front lines such as Bakhmut and in Luhansk, as well as operations against the Guinea trenches. But at the moment, the general trajectory on Ukraine's southern front lines is still complicated. Alexei Danilov suggested that there can be no doubt that Russia caused the collapse of the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River in the southern region of Kherson, since the area has been occupied since the beginning of the Russian occupation. Kiev said a few months ago that the dam had been removed by Russian forces and suggested that Moscow blew up the dam to prevent Ukrainian troops from crossing the Dnipro River to attack Russian forces. Russia blames Ukraine for the collapse of the dam. Danilov also stated that Ukraine will now face pressure to accept peace talks. He reiterated Ukraine's stance that negotiations cannot be held until Russian forces leave Ukrainian territory. Alexei Danilov's statements indicated that what happened in Kherson would have a serious negative impact on the war. But Danilov added that the Ukrainian army will not give up victory no matter what. We can clearly understand this from the recent military casualties of the Russian army. In the past 5 days alone, Russian forces have lost more than 4,000 soldiers on the battlefield, almost the equivalent of a full NATO brigade. In addition, Russia lost about 60,000 soldiers in the area around Bakhmut. Most of these Russian soldiers were killed and wounded as a result of this heavy loss. Russian troops advanced only 29 kilometers from this city. In other words, for every 48 centimeters of land that Russia gained, one soldier was killed or wounded. Ian Stubbs, senior military advisor to the OSCE delegation to the United Kingdom, expressed this at the Security Cooperation Forum in Vienna. Stubbs also noted that Russia's continued attempts to undermine the will and determination of the Ukrainian people by repeatedly launching missile and drone strikes on towns and cities in Ukraine are pathetic. According to Ian Stubbs, these were the helpless actions of Russian military leaders who had run out of ideas, constantly overestimated their force capacity, and underestimated the strength and determination of the Ukrainian people. The senior military advisor to the United Kingdom also stressed that it has been more than a year since Russia's military leaders were forced to renounce their desire for a crushing and decisive victory through modern, united armed maneuver warfare. But for over a year, we've watched Russian decision-makers double down on similar unfortunate contingency plans to resort to a cutting-edge, intellectually bankrupt war of attrition. This process resulted in a gruesome demonstration of willingness to sacrifice the Russian people, including the mobilized citizens of the Kremlin, by the thousands in the name of Putin's terrible and fake war. So what has Russia now gained from this war? The Russians suffered heavy losses, allowing the Ukrainians to gain a much larger attack area. Thanks to this, the purpose of the Ukrainian counteroffensive became increasingly clear. First of all, the Ukrainians are considering having the Russian occupation forces by advancing towards the Sea of Azov. In this way, the Russian garrison on the Crimean Peninsula will be cornered, while the Ukrainians will be able to bring their formidable long-range fire into the range of more Russian logistics functions. Kiev has repeatedly expressed its intention to liberate Crimea, although some in the West thought this would push Russian President Vladimir Putin to take more aggressive measures. So the only thing Russia won in this war was a historical lesson as it underestimated its opponent.